Patrick Hamm is an award-winning independent producer and cinematographer. He came to filmmaking from a prior career in academia, holding a BA in Ethics, Politics and Economics from Yale University and a Ph.D. in Sociology from Harvard University. His films combine creative excellence with a clear social mission, often working with first-time feature directors. His notable films include Who I Am Not, This Rain Will Never Stop, and Freedom for the Wolf.
During the dictatorship.
Democracy seems to be in crisis right now.
In this episode, Patrick shares his journey from academia to film, discussing his motivations behind the sociological themes that continue to influence his work, team-building challenges, and balancing storytelling with financial demands. Hello, Patrick. Good morning and welcome to the Olyn podcast.
Very glad to be here. How are you?
Not too bad. Honored to be here interviewing you. You have quite a background navigating from the academic world to the film industry, mostly documentaries, but also fiction as well, as I understand. So I would very much like to know how you navigated or what motivated that change from the sociology to the film production.
Yeah, definitely. That was an important turning point in my life. I finished a Ph.D. in sociology and then spent a little bit of time lecturing, which was great. I loved teaching, but I did not see myself as a researcher / academic who publishes and often is limited by the audience that they can reach. So I guess that was sort of a big thing that I was thinking about during my final years in grad school. And around that time, I was already really interested in documentary film. I sort of had an amateur background in both filmmaking and photography, going literally back to my childhood when my dad brought back this massive Sony camera from a business trip somewhere. And I think he felt like one tape and then it became mine. So that was kind of there. But I guess in graduate school, I had a classmate, a very dear friend of mine, Rupert Russell. He's the son of the British black sheep of cinema, Ken Russell. And we had sort of been talking about making a film, and he was a year below me in the program. And after I finished and left my teaching job and moved to Berlin, from the United States to Berlin, Germany, we started talking about doing a documentary. And that project, which dealt with the rise of illiberal democracy, so sort of fake democracy, leaders who are elected but then behave like authoritarians. And we started working on this project in 2014. And I would say it was heavily sociologically inspired with, two people who came fresh out of academia. And then we started working on this project. Really, during that process, left academia behind in many ways and discovered storytelling by film versus storytelling by academic paper. And that film became quite the journey. While working on it, I had the opportunity to also work on a non-documentary project, a fiction film, and learned a ton during that process, including about distribution and festivals where I got quite involved. At some point I was like, okay, I guess I have a new career and never looked back. But one thing I can say about all of this is to this day, pretty much every project I work on has a sociological theme in it. I can always make that connection, and I feel like everything I do remains quite heavily informed by that background, even though it's I guess now over 10 years ago that I've actually been affiliated with the university.
Amazing. So tell me more about that first project. Was it only you and your colleague, or did you manage to, grow a team over that?
At the very beginning, it was literally just the two of us. And like I mentioned, it started out as a fairly academic project in that we were interested in like the idea of freedom and some fairly highfalutin ideas and started by interviewing academics that we knew at Harvard, at
Okay.
Stanford, and tried to, that's how we started. And I would say initially it was almost like it had it had the I thought it was more like a summer project. I didn't think it was going to turn into like a multi-year endeavor.
All
And
right.
then what happened is we started to think, okay, how are we going to actually tell this story? And
Mhm.
both of us were very interested in protest movements and sort of people actually struggling for democracy or dealing with the challenges of a new democracy. And so we came up with this plan to shoot this film in 5 different countries. And
Okay.
that's what we ended up doing. So we filmed in Hong Kong, which at the time was going through a movement called the Umbrella Revolution, which was the then latest culmination of Hong Kong's fight for democracy. We filmed in Tunisia, which on the 5-year anniversary of the Arab Spring. So it was a country that had recently gotten democracy, but continued to be really, yeah, full of challenges. And we also filmed in India, in Japan, and then of course in the United States, the home of
I
freedom
see.
and democracy. And yeah, that film started out as a team of two. We then found a second producer, my now dear friend Camilla Hall. We're currently working on our fourth project together. And we managed to raise some funding for this film.
Mm. Okay.
And got later on a film fund involved, Observatory Pictures, and so it sort of
Amazing.
grew steadily. But really, most of the legwork was done by a group of 3 to 5 people at any given point.
Well, sometimes with rather small groups, you can be very quick, right? Very agile, and that's hyper efficiency sometimes.
Yeah, hyper efficiency, and also we didn't have any other choices. We did not have the resources to hire a large crew. We devoted most of the money that we did have to purchasing camera gear and plane
Mhm.
tickets, and then we went out
Exactly.
there. And
Wow, amazing. So that takes me to a question that was that when you considered setting up a Bulldog agenda? Do these colleagues form part of that as well? And how you mentioned before that you always consider this sociology aspect in your productions, right? So how do you look and how do you select such projects?
yeah, that's a good question. So Bulldog Agenda is my production company in Germany, which I started relatively early on, but I would say it wasn't until later that I ran it more like a business. Initially, it was
Hmm.
just the vehicle, the shell to run a production out of. And I would say initially also I did not really have any process for selecting projects.
Hmm.
The first one, as I shared, grew out of a shared interest and passion with a friend and classmate. Another project which I picked up literally while working on this project is also just something that came my way, and we decided, oh, we got to work on this too. So we were working on 2 docs at the same time, and it was all pretty. I don't even want to say intuitive. It was just what was there seemed like a great opportunity, and so I and my friends slash colleagues ran with it. In 2018, I would say that was another big turning point for me. I participated in a program called Berlinale Talents,
Hmm.
both as a producer, and I also did something called Camera Studio, which is for cinematography. So that's sort of my second skill. My hard skill is that I know how to operate cameras pretty well, and I contribute camera work to, yeah, really all the films that I worked on in the documentary space. And that program, I think it gave a lot of confidence to me in that up until that point, I didn't really consider myself a producer. I was like, okay, I'm
Hmm.
doing this, but I wasn't sure where it was going. And that program definitely solidified in my head the idea that I'm a filmmaker, and I also started to learn a lot more about how to fund projects more systematically, learned about the European film funding landscape, which, unlike the North American world, has public money for the arts. People across Europe finance their films often through co-productions where they mix and match funding from different countries and different film funds and broadcasters. So around that time, I started to dip my feet into that world. And that's also when I think I became slightly more, I guess, systematic in terms of how I select projects. But
well, of course. I mean, you started bootstrapping that organic growth until you said it yourself, right? You saw this going more into or also having a business side, right? Running not only ideas and recordings, but of course a business that has to be financially viable.
correct.
How do you balance the need for impactful storytelling with the requirement of being financial viable?
Yeah. How do I balance that? It's a question to which the answer is constantly evolving.
Definitely.
I would say it's not obvious. I'm torn between these two things because regularly the stories that I am interested in telling or that the directors I work with want to tell are not financially promising initially, and we kind of have to figure out how to make it work. I think one of the most important things for me now is that I want to make sure in the first instance that all the people who work on my films get paid decently. Initially in my early career, myself and others would volunteer, and it was definitely very passion driven, and there's a lot of positive energy, but certainly that's not something that's sustainable. So I guess during the financing stage, I work with all the tools I can find, whether they're grants or obtaining foundation money or sometimes raising private funds, sometimes doing pre-sales with broadcasters, making sure that we have money to pay people while we make the film. And again, I think about this differently today. And when I'm saying this, it sounds so obvious, people should get paid. But certainly as a young filmmaker or younger filmmaker, that was not obvious to me. And it seemed like, all right, you work for free and you get paid later. And that I think is not the way to have a sustainable career in this industry. It's really important to make sure that everybody gets a decent pay. And then in terms of balancing sort of, the social impact and the profit, I guess I don't necessarily see a tension in that per se, in that the field I work in, creative documentary or, generally documentary filmmaking, which makes up about 75% of my work these days. Most of these films are driven by a desire to make a difference in the world, with few exceptions, I think. And so I feel like the ecosystem is designed around that. I think the problem lies in the fact that there are too few funding sources available, and those that are available are extremely competitive. And since I work primarily with or have been working with either young filmmakers or directors who are early in their career, I found it harder to get financing for those types of projects because people don't have a track record yet.
Because of the team. Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say that it's harder the financing part or maybe the commercialization part?
I mean, the financing part, I think you get better at over time. And that's both a result of being more familiar with the financing options out there. Everything's less scary. Filling out tons and tons of applications becomes more routine than this, anxiety-inducing experience. That doesn't mean that it becomes easier, but I would say there is something to it where if you are consistent in applying and also think outside the box, I feel like it's manageable. Not easy, but manageable. Whereas the commercialization, it's tough because I would say every year since I've entered this industry, people have said things like, oh, the market is changing. Everything's different now. And at the very beginning, when I started this, people were still selling DVDs. And that was like a way for filmmakers, especially in the documentary space, to make money. But circa 2017, that was gone. And I would say it's a very rapidly changing landscape right now, in that I think there was a minute, 2017, 18, 19, when it was easier and more lucrative to sell films to streamers, because platforms, I think, were still looking for more independent content instead of creating their own original content. Now I think it's it's challenging, and I feel like the change that has been initiated by the growing presence of commercial streamers in our space, especially in documentary.
Okay.
It's still ongoing. Television was historically a place where there's a lot of money, but those budgets are shrinking. A lot of those broadcasters are struggling to figure out what they are. Are they also streamers? So, yeah. But that's all my way of saying, okay, this is not an easy industry. If you want a steady and predictable job, do not become a filmmaker, especially not a documentary filmmaker.
But
But
if it's changing, it must certainly mean that there's new opportunities upcoming. That's for sure.
yeah, that's definitely what I feel.
Exactly.
And
Okay, I'd like to better understand a little about some of your projects. When you look into Patrick Hamm, two titles come up, and I'm very curious to understand. For example, Freedom for the Wolf, explores democracy. So when producing that film and the impact it did, what can you tell me about that whole experience, and how when you finished that and saw that coming into light, how was that?
yeah, that was, I think, in many ways a wonderful experience. I would say that film, definitely stressful while making it, but somewhere along the way we realized that we were really onto something. In that today, conversations around fake democracy or illiberal democracy, I feel like, have really permeated the mainstream. Many people have talked about this, written about this. Back in 2014, 15, 16, when we were working on this film, this was very much a new idea, and I feel like we really kind of nailed this topic quite well. So very early on, while we were filming in Hong Kong, the New York Times wrote a piece about our film, which was not only very helpful, but was also a affirmation that we're moving in the right direction. And so that, I would say, became something that we tried to do throughout production already, connect with journalists and also academics. Quite a few academics are featured in the film, including major figures like Francis Fukuyama, for example. And so we started to think about, okay, how are we going to get this film out there and make sure that the ideas are being discussed. Now, I should add that we filmed in 2016 and we thought we were done. This was the time of the US presidential election, and we, for better or worse, made the bet that we thought Trump was going to win it. And I guess, yeah, we were right. We ended up filming at the Trump inauguration and sort of covered that whole process. And I think that also added to the film having a high kind of degree of relevance. And yeah, and then go ahead. I think you're going to ask me a question.
How that bet played a role in the filming?
Well, in that we were... There was a parallel universe in which we would have stopped filming in kind of the summer of 2016.
Okay.
And this would have been more of a warning, but, well, everything was fine, I guess. Maybe that was the narrative we had in our head. It's very hard for me to put me back in that headspace, because we were increasingly certain that this was going to work out in Trump's favor, and it did. And it was the central idea of the film, I would say. And some people at the time referred to the phenomenon, the illiberal democracy phenomenon, as the Trump phenomenon. And I think, again, that really helped with the conversation that we later managed to engineer around the film. It had a very successful festival journey, playing both at a lot of major documentary film festivals like Sheffield Doc Fest and IDFA. But then it was also selected for Slam Dance, which was really good for our film. We won the audience award there. And then we got a major sales agent, Cinephil, to come on board. And so all of that, I think, really helped. There was a certain element which was just the luck of being in the right place at the right time.
Wow.
But I also feel like we had really invested ourselves in thinking about this topic and consulting experts, finding the right people whose story to portray in this film. So
to me,
all worked.
being in the right place at the right moment, to me, that means taking risks, understanding what you're doing, having that vision, and going forward, right? If you take the risk, sometimes it will pay off. Maybe sometimes you will only learn, but definitely worth taking. So you've also touched other maybe sensitive topics like displacements and conflicts. So I understand that you've worked with people in war zones. So what can you tell me about those experiences?
Yeah, that is definitely a strand that runs through several of my films. The idea of displacement, refugees. I worked with a filmmaker who's now a Dutch citizen, formerly a Syrian refugee, on a short film about migration, displacement, and identity. That was a lovely project, which was back in 2018. It was the director's first short film. Now she has since graduated the Dutch Film Academy and sort of is in the process of making a name for herself. We're now collaborating on a feature film. So that is one example where I would say I took a small but still, I guess, risk with her, really believed in that story. And I definitely mentored her for the last couple of years. And, it's really exciting now to sort of have this long-term collaboration emerge from that. So that's one instance that comes to mind.
Yeah.
I also worked on a film about the Ukrainian conflict. In fact, the conflict before it became the full-scale invasion.
Okay. You worked on this topic before it actually started.
Correct. Yes.
Officially started.
Yes. So this is a collaboration that started in 2018, 19, with a group of Ukrainian filmmakers, specifically director Alina Golova, who's very talented, dear friend, and so are her entire collective, the Tabor company. And that project dealt with the conflict in the Eastern Donbass, told through a very unconventional lens, namely a refugee who is half Syrian, half Ukrainian due to the family situation. So right around when the Syrian civil war erupted, he and his family left Syria and moved to Eastern Ukraine, only to encounter another war there shortly thereafter. The film, it's called This Rain Will Never Stop.
Yeah.
Its working title was Between Two Wars, somewhat fittingly. And so that was, again, a very special experience working with this team. It became both, I guess, on the financing side, ultimately a good story in that we managed to build a 4-country co-production there. So we had funding out of Latvia, Germany, the Netherlands, and then Qatar through the Doha Film Institute.
Okay.
And
because of course, what some people, some countries, some societies might find the right choice to finance, some might decide otherwise or think otherwise, right? So what are those challenges that you face when tackling politically sensitive content?
Yeah, I would say with that film, the challenges at the time were limited because the conflict was not really visible. To those who followed Ukraine since 2014, since the invasion and annexation of Crimea, they know that the country has been at war for now 10 years, quite a while before the full-scale invasion. But at the time when we were financing this film, I would say that was not necessarily on people's radar as much and made it less controversial. But I would say I have worked on other projects, including a film, or in fact multiple titles, about democracy in Hong Kong. I mentioned this topic earlier in the context of our project Freedom for the Wolf, which prominently featured the 2014 protests. I've worked on other projects and advised other projects on this topic. And that, for example, is very challenging because when you're working on Hong Kong, you are not going to attract necessarily favorable views from China. So there may be a lot of people who don't want to touch that, who don't want to touch controversial topics of that kind. But again, I'm going to withhold any sort of blanket judgment because there also are people who do and organizations who do. I would say I'm just very mindful of this all the time. Most of the topics that I'm working on, including projects I'm working on now, carry a fair degree of controversy. I'm currently working on a film about abuse, specifically sexual abuse at these elite classical music institutions. And if there's one theme running through this film, it's that these institutions don't want anybody to talk about this because it could harm their reputation, it could harm their funding prospects. And so the result is that, they often enable this kind of abuse by doing nothing.
I can imagine that if you're not dealing with let's say regional political issues, but rather relevant, of course, and sensitive topics on on the countries or the regions that you normally work, you might be finding challenges, maybe not only in financing but also in distribution. Are you finding these challenges in distribution for such productions?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. I will say I've been fairly consistently lucky in getting films that I've worked on, or having helped to get these films into leading festivals, and also attracting awards, other accolades, and so on. And, that's, I would say, a testimony of the hard work that went into it. We try to make good films, and this is a way that I guess that gets recognized. Does that always translate into distribution prospects? No, but it lays the foundation, and I feel like for every film, pretty much every project that I've worked on, we managed to find a good distribution path out there. Often this was with the help of sales agents, some of them leading sales agents. Does it mean that I have the answers for the next project? Absolutely not. This is one of the areas where I kind of try to constantly educate myself, even as I don't know, like to think of myself as having the knowledge and the experience myself, but actually I talk to people all the time about this. I attend forums and workshops around distribution to see what people are doing. There's, I would say, a lot of despair around this topic, because it's all too common that you finish a film, and even if you do get it out to a leading festival, people might not buy it. I could list so many good films that I've encountered which did not fully see the light of day, and instead they are on streaming platforms, sometimes self-distributed, and the filmmakers make, I don't know, $25 a month or something like that, and that's no good. And this, I think, speaks to a fundamental crisis, a fundamental problem in the industry. And I would say much of that has to do with the changes that came about through the presence of major streaming platforms. And while I don't have I don't want to say too many negative things about streaming, because when I started this work, Netflix was basically still mailing DVDs, so, and now they've turned documentary into something that everybody watches. And that's something I think Netflix and some of the other streamers have to be credited with, so that's a massive positive change for, I think, the presence of the genre in people's viewing habits. While at the same time, I think it's made it increasingly hard for independent creators to get their work out there, and more importantly, also to make their work be lucrative, to monetize their creations. And it's in certain ways both a great and a dark period that we live in right now. And
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I believe that not everything is, black or white, and everything can be seen from many angles, and they've done good, but they are changing, and everyone's evolving, right? So there's for sure there's some room for improvement in the film industry, in the distribution ways, everything, right? So maybe finishing here, I'd like to know what's next. What can you tell us it's next for Patrick, for the Bulldog Agenda?
Yeah, so I'm working currently on, I guess I split my work between producing films, those are titles where I'm fully involved day to day, and films that I executive produce, where I try to be the most useful person I can be without being full-time involved. Often that involves funding or helping with distribution and so on. So I'm currently in active production on multiple films. I mentioned that title about sexual abuse at elite classical music institutions. That film is in the final stages of editing. It's going to be finished before the end of the year.
Okay.
It's going to go out to hopefully a leading festival sometime in the first quarter of next year. We're just initiating submissions as we speak.
I can imagine a few happening.
You can imagine a few. See, there's both the usual suspects and some others that we're starting to submit to or have submitted to. This film is very special to me in that I'm working with a director who is both a filmmaker and a world famous / internationally acclaimed musician who's also an abuse survivor. And I've been working with her for 2 years on this film. And it's been both a very tough but also an incredibly illuminating journey. I think it's going to be a great, but again, also, I think, tough film when it comes out, when it's finished. So that is one of them. I have some other projects about which I can say less specific things, so I can kind of give you the headlines. I'm working a film about maritime trafficking and people smuggling in South Asia, specifically in Bangladesh, which tells the story of a mother whose son disappeared now 9 years ago. And when I started working with the two directors, who are both from Bangladesh, it was very much a film about the tragedy of having lost your child and coping with that. But then as we were filming, a number of signs of hope emerged that this kid may be alive in a prison. There's journalists who took pictures at these detention facilities. And initially our character, this mom, and then a whole bunch of other families from the region started discovering their kids in these photos. And so we're currently involved both in front and behind the camera in a adventure to hopefully get this this person and others released. The fact that there was recently some major political changes in Bangladesh, I think, will be helpful with this. And the journey is ongoing.
Well, I have no words, to be honest. It's impressive. You gave me goosebumps. I can't wait for those productions to be live, to get to know more such topics. And I appreciate very much your time, Patrick. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fun. I'll be back anytime.